Sean, how's it going, man?
It's great. Good to see you. And
Good to
good to
see
be here
you.
again.
Nice looking hat you got on.
Thanks. It was yeah, Ryan gave it to me at the Legacy event, which was cool.
Oh, well, and you guys listen, you're not going to get a free one from Ryan. So if you guys do want a hat, go to store.orderofman.com, get your swag. I think you could probably get an order in maybe today, and then you're probably risking yourselves in regards to getting some stuff in for Christmas. So Sean, I have to ask you this question because I do this, and luckily my wife doesn't listen to the podcast, so she has no idea. But during like the holiday season, I start buying shit, right? Not shit. I end up buying good stuff for my family. And I swear I buy more stuff for myself during the holiday season than I normally do. Because as I'm shopping, I'm like, oh, I'll get that. And so all these packages are coming in. And my wife's like legit thinking like, holy crap, honey, like we shouldn't get so much stuff for the kids. And I'm like secretly like, actually half of that's like for me. So do you do this at all? Or is this just me being in like, and I get that this is entirely selfish. This goes against the whole concept of Christmas, but I don't know what it is. I start buying more things during the Christmas holiday for myself. So I don't know.
I yes, I fall into that too.
The
Funny thing is I've actually bought a couple of things that I was wanting anyways. Because my wife and I are in this weird situation where we don't wait for holidays or things. It's just like as we want things or need them, we just buy them. And so I found myself doing that a couple of times, and it got here and we're wrapping gifts. And I told my wife, you know what, here, if you want a present to give me, here it is. So,
Totally.
I'll act surprised.
Last Christmas, I even wrapped, like I felt guilty that I bought myself some cool stuff. So I even wrapped it for myself. So like to
from Santa,
at least so I'd like have to delay opening it at least, like that was like the least I could do. So I don't know. Maybe it's first world problems. It's a good sign when you're in a position where you're like, I want something and you get it. And it's not like a big deal. Right. And I remember those days, man. I remember the days of wanting something and knowing I can't get it. Right. And because it would be a bad purchase because, my ratio of income to what I want was not even close, So I guess it's a good sign to be in this phase of life where if you need something or want something, you can do it. And it's not really that big of a deal. So,
yeah, I think it took me a couple decades to get over that kind of being broke. I remember not having money for gas. I, was living in my car and not even able to, like, I'd have to call a local friend to see if they had $20 they could bring me at the gas station because my card was tapped out or whatever.
Totally. I remember like, it's just silly crazy. Like I should go to the dentist. I'm not going to the dentist. Why? Because I don't have the money to pay for the dentist. Right. And I mean, I remember scenarios where, I'd pound ibuprofen like there's no tomorrow. And then I had I didn't even learn. How's this? I learned about my body adapting to ibuprofen due to the pain of my teeth and going, oh, it's not working anymore. I'm doubling my dose. Like I got to go Tylenol. I got to like mix this thing up. You know what I mean? To like delay having to go to the dentist, and it's not until I was like losing my mind and losing sleep that I was like, I got to go in. Like, I just got to bite the bullet here. Which by the way, I later learned you can actually die from like infections in your teeth. So, anyone listening, don't do what I did, but those are tough times. Like I even remember some buddies, like they would go give, plasma. Like that was the strategy, right? It's like, oh, I want to increase my cash flow. I'm going to donate plasma for a little bit of extra income, so it's,
I did that one time. It's, if I'm being honest, I did it once. Didn't tell anybody.
Yeah. Good times, man. Well, and it's funny. It sounds so cliche, but I was just reading a quote the other day on Insta, and it was about the most struggling times in your life you look back on, and those were some of the best. And I know it sounds corny, but it's totally true. My entire, and I don't want to sound all negative. Like everyone's guys are like, whatever, you guys don't have it hard. But I had a tough upbringing, I would consider. And you know what? Those are some of the best times. Those were the best Christmases. Those were the best scenarios where I didn't get a present for my birthday. or we were the poor family that like the neighborhood donated blankets to, and those were some of the best times. They really were. So
yeah, best learning experiences at the very least.
Yeah, for sure. So anyhow, I digress. It's a tradition for us to waste everyone's time at least for a few minutes.
Yeah, in the beginning
before we get into questions. Yeah. So
well, hey, I will say that last time we were together, there was a huge spike in people listening. Ryan said it's because Dan Crenshaw was on that week, but I beg to differ. Yeah.
I beg to differ as well. So but Ryan does have a sensitive ego. And so if you guys want, don't let him know how great this episode went. So then that way he doesn't get offended and, doesn't think he's not the man. After all, it is his movement. So yeah,
that's right. He is the man
there.
Yeah.
So we're going to field questions from Facebook. That's facebook.com/group/orderman. If you guys want to join us, join the community. And, we talk about this all the time, band with us. It's refreshing, Sean, to be part of a movement that is on the court in life and not sitting in the sideline and complaining. And I think by default, I think it's very human nature. Someone, even suggested to me the other day on a post that like, maybe it's a form of socialization, right? Why people are victims. I actually think it's default. I think it's a little bit of human nature for us not to take responsibility and point the finger and blame. And that's not what we're about in Order Man. That's not what we're about in the Iron Council. It's about getting on the court and making a difference. And so if you guys are tired of being spectators and you feel like you're complaining about a bunch of stuff, I would challenge you. What are you doing about it? And if you're not doing anything about it, then band with us, join us in the Iron Council, or join us at least in the Facebook group and start banding with us and start perpetuating or pushing out the message of sovereignty, which is really the message of ownership, and taking back your lives and taking control of how things are. So anyhow.
I agree. And as you say that, if you're listening to this thinking, well, what is sovereignty? What does that mean? Read the book, get the book.
Yeah.
Read
There's
it.
a book.
It'll clear up a lot for you.
Yeah. And you can get that book. I think you can maybe get some signed copies at the store. Once again, store.orderman.com. All right, Sean, you ready to jump into these questions? So I'll read these off since there's a tradition of me slaughtering names. No sense of throwing you under the bus, because I know you obviously would never pronounce a name incorrectly.
No.
But Ryan likes to continually make me look bad. So I'll keep reading questions. So, and then we'll go with it. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. I got my caffeine. I'm ready. So Jonathan Smolders, what are your thoughts on prepping and self-sustainability, particularly food and water storage, growing your own food, hunting, and etc.? How do you find the line between being reasonably prepared, being obsessively paranoid? So how do you not become the guy right in the neighborhood, the prepper, which I'm sorry, I know you're supposed to answer these first. I find it interesting, be right, because that guy's only that guy until shit hits the fan. And then he's like a genius, right? So, but anyhow, go ahead.
For me, this has evolved even over the last few years, say like 5 or 6 years as I got into hunting, because I didn't grow up hunting or doing any of that, but wanting to, and this is obviously like 5-6 years ago, started watching all the, I guess you could say like vegan things on Netflix, like Food Inc. and, all of these. That's
kind of the documentaries around, or the meat eaters one where you're supposed to watch it and feel like you feel bad, like you shouldn't eat meat anymore.
Yeah. And they're more like just talking about, just how bad our food is. And I think most of them are trying to sway you to be vegan, but I got that I just wanted to source more of my food, know where it was coming from. And started asking about hunting and other things, and had a friend who got me into bow hunting. And then, kind of along the same time, it was looking at every aspect. So since then we built a garden, on our property. I started hunting, started doing some of those things. We already had a bunch of food storage that we had in for my wife and my daughter have, my wife has lupus and my daughter has autoimmune issues as well. and some sensory processing stuff. And so everything they have can't have gluten in it. And so our food storage is, we had to choose that wisely. So we went through that process, and we have at least a year. And then our water, we have, holy smokes, about 150 gallons is what we keep in rotation. And then we have a generator backup and those sorts of things. So ours is really fundamental, but it's more than most, I think. But it's also been built up over the last 5-6 years. I have a couple freezers. Those are full of meat that we've harvested, either myself or my sons. And it's really changed over the last few years, but I could tell you over that 5-6 years, I've never felt more confident, especially through the pandemic. We didn't need toilet paper. We didn't need water. We didn't need food. We didn't worry about going to the store. Literally, we didn't go to the store at all. I think when people were scared in the very beginning, really scared. Yeah. We didn't go anywhere for, I think, 2-3 weeks. We just didn't have to.
Yeah. Well, and how, and this is a whole other debatable thing around, the death toll of COVID and how serious, but let's imagine it's like really bad. Like, I don't know, 50% fatality rate.
Yeah, that's real.
Would you go to the store? You know what I mean? And how many of us would be able to survive without going to the store and knowing that like going to the store meant you might die, right? Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, that's legit, man. I have to ask this question really from my own personal perspective. What are you using for water storage? The white one with the metal frame, like those big square ones. What are you using for?
We started with these big 50-gallon drums, like the big blue ones. We started with that,
with
and we
the
still
spigot
have
on the bottom or whatever. Yeah,
we still have those, but we have Arrowhead, which I think is owned by Nestle now, and those 5-gallon bottles, they make racks for them. A lot of people don't know, and all you have to do is call and ask, and so it lays them sideways, and you can stack them. So I have a block stack on one of the walls in my garage of 30 of those bottles. They're nice because it's easy. You can rotate them. They stay for all that stuff.
Yeah, totally. Well, the other thing to consider too. So, we're not even asking Jonathan's question.
And they travel.
We'll get to your question in a second. But after Katrina, I actually shifted my opinion about food storage quite a bit. So, back in the day when I was a kid, food storage was canned food, right? You would have all these canned foods, and people that was really organized would have this cool little cycling thing where you grab the can in the front and you drop the new cans in the back. And, you have this system. And then after Katrina, you're like, well, that didn't work because their entire basement's underwater. What are you going to load up like 500 cans of food in a backpack? Like that's not going to work either. And so I kind of shifted my opinion about food storage from heavy and short-term cans to like, actually I'm going dry pack, light food, so I could actually load it up, throw it in a truck and take off. And I kind of like, and to the point with your water approach, the nice part about that, you could load that up, right? Like you could take half of it or all of it really and load it up in your truck versus those, which ones I'm talking about, right? My apologies guys for the ignorance here, but there's those giant ones that are like, like 250 gallon and they have a white frame. Those are cool. You're not loading those anywhere, right?
They don't move anywhere. Yeah.
They're not moving. They're sticking on the side of your house. And so it might make sense to have those, but I like what you're doing in the sense of there's some portability to it in the event that you needed to. So, but back to Jonathan's question, where's the line? Where's the line, Sean, from your perspective in regards to being prepared versus being obsessed and paranoid?
I mean, I think if you really want to know that line, just check out that show Preppers. Because I mean, that's
compare yourself to those guys.
Yeah. When you start digging a hole under your house and, you put a HEPA filter in it and all these things to, literally self-sustain and a nuclear holocaust, then that's that. And like you said, people could say that's past the line unless that happens, right? Unless there's like a nuclear fallout and then you're the guy like Cloverfield, right? And that, I don't know if you've seen that, the guy who seems like he's psycho, but he's the one guy surviving when aliens.
Actually, a better reference is Encino Man. Is it Encino Man? Remember, they kept him in the basement when he was a little kid, and he came out, and he's like, he thought it was the 50s. Is that right, Encino Man?
Yeah, it's not Encino Man. That's same guy though. Same guy. I know what you're talking about.
It's super
Blast
funny.
of the Past. Is that it?
Blast of the
something like I know what you're talking about though.
Yeah. And his parents just like raising, and they stayed in their bunker until he was like an adult kind of thing, right? Yeah, it's super funny. Well, I think here's the, all joking aside, Jonathan, I think the line is, if you stop living in the moment, right? Like I think that's, and we could probably use that line to determine a whole lot of things, right? When you're going overboard on anything, the question is are you forgetting to enjoy life? And I think if you're doing that because you're so paranoid about preparing for a disaster in the future, you got a problem. Maybe that's the line.
Yeah. And you have to think through it too. Like I know I have a bunch of gas, and I have a trailer, that has a gas pump on it. So like the plan is to hook up to that, take some of the gas cans that we have, and we would probably leave. Like we have a place to go to now, that we didn't used to, but we do now. But a lot could happen in between, we're not necessarily going to hunker down here. So there's a lot of different things to think about, but I think what you said is true. I think it's worse that people procrastinate. They tend to put it off, and then they don't have anything when they need it. But then, like you said, just put yourself in a position where you're confident that you could go at least a month. So that you can feel that confidence. But, if you get obsessed beyond that, where it's making like you're scared all the time, I think there's a problem.
Yeah, for sure. Here's last example. We'll move on to the next question. And once again, it's like, let me just say this. Often during the week when we record these, I walk away going, I need to not maybe share too many personal things, you know what I mean? In fear of who listens. So mom, if you're listening, don't take this personal. I actually think that so much of our lives, including how we react to how we're parented, is sometimes outside of the control of the parent, right? You don't know what your kids are going to latch onto and what they're going to use as defining moments, or, you know what I mean? Or what perspectives they're going to create, whether you intended that or not. So with that disclaimer, when I was a kid, for like Bible study or whatever, we got in this phase of time, we were constantly reading books about the second coming, right? Like the books were like, and the moon shall turn to blood, right? And then like after we finished that book, the next book was about, fire and brimstone, and it was these books. No joke. I'm like 6th grade. And I remember being depressed, thinking, I'm never going to grow up. I'm never going to get a chance to get married and have kids. Like the world's going to be over by then. Yeah. And I was like, seriously, it kind of like messed with me quite a bit. There you go. You don't want to be that person that you're just so like distraught and sad about the future because because you're not living in the present. Right. And for me, like that was like a negative thing for me as a kid. I was like actually quite depressed about it. Now in the same breath, maybe it helped me appreciate what I did have when I realized that the world wasn't going to end, by the time I got into high school, so you never know, I guess. So, all right, next question. Jason Curtis. Sean, what is the best single piece of advice you have ever received? Thanks for everything you guys do. Kip, continue to, everything you and Kip continue to do. So best advice you've ever received. Single piece, best advice.
Oh my goodness. I don't even know how you.
I know we should have prepped this.
I mean, honestly, I'll take it from a marriage standpoint, because I think in our homes, right, it's in protecting, providing, presiding, and as a husband and father, I think the best advice I ever got was "She happy, me happy," from one of my mentors, and it put me in a position where I really, instead of being selfish and focusing on what I wanted and what I wanted my wife to do to make our lives better, made me focus on getting better.
Yeah.
And, without going over the line of just awaiting her beck and call. Right. But, putting us in a position where I made that of most importance in our lives. And that's trickled into me being a better father, leader in my business and my community and everything else. So I would say that would probably be the most valuable one to this point.
Like it.
And, yeah.
I can't, the best advice, I struggle with giving this because it's complex, or I at least it is complex in my mind. Maybe it's not complex once I explain it. But let me do my best. The best advice I ever got was the power of choice in regards to relationships. And the best example I can give to this is, let me preface this by saying, I actually think that most people, if they haven't addressed it, probably have somewhat of an incomplete relationship with their parents, especially in the climate that of our generation, especially with boys and fathers. There's so many broken relationships. And so this probably, that ends up being the best example. And what I would challenge, or what this advice really was, is why, and so I'll just use maybe my dad as an example. Why do I love my dad? And when I, at first glance, right, when that question gets answered, or the question gets placed, to us or asked of us, our immediate result is to come up with the reasons why, right? It's like, why do you love your dad? Well, because he's a hard worker, because he's considerate, because he's this, because he's that. But for some of us, the answer could also be, why don't you love your dad? Right. And it's the same thing. It's a laundry list. And how powerful it is to actually realize that you have a choice in that matter, and that I could actually love my dad, not because of any of those things, but strictly because I choose to. And that there's a level of accepting people for exactly the way they are, without any pretense, to actually love someone because you choose to love them in spite of their faults. And that's a really, really, at least for me, that's a very, very powerful way to look at relationships. Certainly when we talk about people that we're committed to, like our wives or our family members, because the reality of it is sometimes we get locked up in the reasons of why we love people. And then what happens when they change? What happens, Sean, when someone doesn't have a good reason to love their dad, that they don't have a good reason to love their mom, that you can actually still choose to accept them exactly the way they are, and actually choose to love them because you choose to. And that was probably one of the most profound, probably advice I've ever gotten. And it really allows me to focus on letting go of expectations, as well as quote unquote reasons, and actually see people for who they are in the moment, and have some humanity around those relationships. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. It relieves a lot of weight as well. As you were saying it, I thought of a book that I read. One of my favorite books I've recommended to people all the time. It's called Standing for Something by a guy named Gordon B. Hinckley. And talks about the 10 virtues, is what he calls it, that can heal our hearts and homes. And inside of that, forgiveness is one, love is one. There's a laundry list, work, providence, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But he talks a lot about forgiveness, like you're talking about love. There's 10 of them, but that's what I think of is that wasn't advice I got, but that's one of the best books I've read, and kind of calling me out on shortcomings I had, and helping me understand how I could make my life better.
It's been a while since I've read that book. I should probably read that again, actually.
It's right in line with what you just said, though.
Yeah. All right. Jonathan Smolders. Dude, Jonathan, that's 2 questions. Dick. If I'd known that, I would have skipped your first question. This is a good one, so I want to read it. So, thoughts on Facebook's metaverse project and the idea of virtual or augmented reality technology being incorporated into daily internet use beyond gaming. With screens already having a negative effect on our ability to present, connect with the real world, making our daily internet use more immersive seems like it would only exacerbate these issues. Your thoughts, Sean?
You know, I just think of the movie Ready Player One, if you've seen that. And when I watched it, and then now with Meta coming out, I just linked directly to that in the thought process of that and what that might be like. And I think it's kind of inevitable at this point where we're already headed there. We were just in Texas visiting, and we went to this place. It was like it was a game place. It was like an arcade. And I thought of arcades when I was a kid. They actually had an old Frogger in there, right? And I was like,
nice.
This is kind of funny. I played pinball and that stuff. But then we also played the VR games, and it was unreal how those things are, how real they seem, how you feel like you're going, falling off of stuff and whatever else.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, this is where we're headed, whether we like it or not. The only thing that scares me is that people spend more time, they enjoy that better than their real life. And so I think it kind of depends on your viewpoint of it. Some people would say, well, this is real life because you're still interacting with people. It's a place maybe where you'll do some things. You'll have a little more courage to try things because you're not seeing them face to face, and the consequence is different. But I think there's dangers in that too. So, I'm not totally 100% sure what to think of it at this point, but I do think it's going to be an inevitable part of how we live our lives, just like our cell phones. We couldn't have imagined, to 20 years ago. So totally. It was only 20 years ago, till now.
Yeah. I find, to your point, I remember the first time I was playing on a VR headset, and it was a stupid plank game. Like, we've all heard of these, like, you walk on the plank and you jump off. And I remember I was sitting in a room. This is in the early days, like almost like, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or something. And someone had the VR headset and they were projecting what they saw on the screen. And it looks fake, right? Like, it doesn't look real. It's obviously like cartoon plank, cartoon elevator. And the game was, you'd get in an elevator, you go up to like a 50th floor, the elevator doors open, there's a plank, and you walk out in the plank, and then you're supposed to jump off the plank. And people are like all freaking out. Oh my gosh, this is so crazy, whatever. And I'm looking at the screen. I'm like, that looks fake. Like, this is stupid. And I didn't think much of it. And I was like, oh, let me try this. So I get on, I go up the damn elevator, door opens, I see the plank, my heart rate skyrockets.
Wow.
And I logically think in my mind, this is fake. I can feel the carpet underneath my feet in this conference room. I know it's not a real plank, but yet my mind, or my instincts, I should say, probably, are like, you're in danger, right? My heart rate, like, it was a mind, like, or I don't know what you want to call it. Like, it was really, really interesting. And I think we have to consider the fact that, yeah, it's a game, Sean, it's not a big deal, but part of your mind doesn't know that, right? Part of your instincts thinks it is real. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a massive dopamine dump. There wouldn't be excitement. There wouldn't be all these things that make it appealing if your body didn't think that there's some form of reality in it, right? So it's so interesting. But I think it's just like everything else, right? Like, these cell phones, man, these little squares are amazing. And it could be used for greatness, and it could be used for evil. And I think it's the same thing, right? I think, because there are studies like where they're using virtual reality to address PTSD, or psychology, or depression, and other scenarios. So is there some good that could come up? Probably. But is there some negative? Oh yeah. Right. And I think in a world where the deep, and maybe this is the theme of this call, because we kind of started off with it earlier, but like, in the climate of this world being overly victimhoods,
Hmm.
Probably escaping reality and hopping in a virtual environment is probably not what we need more than toughening up and dealing in reality, right? The last thing we probably need is more escape scenarios to get away from, the quote unquote heartaches of life that are probably not heartaches. Let's be frank, and when I watch the intro video from Zuckerberg, when he's talking about, oh, you can escape scenarios so you can, not be triggered or what. I'm like, really? Like that's the solution? Or should the solution be, hey, how do I deal with uncomfortable circumstances? How do I deal with my anger? How do I deal with frustration? How do I deal with other humans versus, oh, they make me upset, thus they must be wrong, and let me now go escape in some augmented reality instead of dealing with truth and reality. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't think it's what we probably need, but I agree with you. I don't think it's going away, right? Like I think this is gonna happen anyway. The question is how do we use the tool, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the important part. It's kind of like, as you were talking, I thought of opioids, right? When they came out with like Oxycontin, and oh man, this is great. It works so much better for pain, and people have a better time through these surgeries and whatever else. Now that it's an epidemic of these people that are hooked, it's one of the worst problems in our country as far as drugs are concerned, is these opioids.
In fact, I just read a study yesterday that's now the number one killer for people between the ages of 18 and 35, I think.
And that, I mean, and it was a quote unquote easier, better, faster solution, right?
Yep.
To the problem of pain. And so
totally,
it's created a whole new problem. And I think there's going to be problems created. And like you said, there's going to be some good things created too. It's just going to be important, I think, for us to be anchored in reality so that we could decipher through the good and the bad.
Yeah. And our approach to COVID-19 is actually a perfect example of it. Give me one, maybe there is, but the overall, I've seen zero communication or promotion from government officials or from the CDC that, hey, by the way, this is probably a really good time to get your health in check and to be healthier and do the more difficult thing, because people may not like this. Guess what? If you're overweight, you are at higher risk of dying. So suck it up. And you know what? You should probably get in better shape as a long-term strategy. But you don't hear that, right? It's been almost 2 years. How many people have lost weight and are in better shape because COVID was like, hey, you know what? This thing's dangerous. And by the way, I was reading something just the other day. The more obese you are, increases your chances of major complications from COVID. So if you're 50 pounds overweight versus 100 pounds, the 100-pound individual has a higher risk. So even losing partial weight and not being as obese could actually highly benefit you. But yet no one talks about that. Why? Because it's the hard thing to do, right? Give me the easy pill, Sean. Give me the easy way out, because God forbid we actually deal with like the actual issue, right? Or something bigger. Everything has to be a fix. It's a good example. I was jiu-jitsu, hurt my wrist. This is probably like 10 years ago. Went to the doctor, did his x-ray and everything. He's like, you're fine. I think we just tore some tendons or whatever. And I'm like, nothing we can do. And he's like, no. He's like, what's the shot? Darn it. Cortisone, right?
Cortisone,
let me give you that shot, and it'll take away the pain. You should be solid. And I'm like, well, hold on. So I won't feel the pain? And he's like, no, for about 6 months or so. And I'm like, that's awesome. I go, is it going to like help heal it better? And he's like, no, just takes away the pain. And I'm like, yeah, but if I keep training and I don't feel that pain in 6 months, it's probably going to be worse, right? Yeah, it's totally going to be worse if you keep training. I'm like, yeah, let me feel the pain. I'm okay with that, right? Let me adjust. Let me train differently, and let me know that I have an injury so I can actually react appropriately and not make it worse. Right. And it's like Ryan uses that analogy of the gauges on your truck, right? It's like when the warning sign comes on, you don't go, just turn that off, right? You're like, oh, I need to do something, right? So we want those gauges. We want those little warning signs saying, hey, rise up. And most difficult situations are somewhat of an example of those warning signs on our gauges saying, hey, you need to check the tire pressure or check the oil or whatever, or get gas. And we shouldn't ignore them, but I don't know. Maybe I'm rat holing on this too much.
It's probably, but I agree. It's true though. It's a good hole to go down.
All right. Carrick. Oh man. See, this is when you should be actually reading. Yeah. Carrick, your last name. Carrick, alphabet M. I'm currently working in law enforcement and I have found a lot of success. However, I want to move into a field where I can be my own boss and have decided to open a gym with the hopes of expanding into my own jiu-jitsu academy when I get my black belt. I'm in the process of interviewing local gym owners and management to learn where they fell short and succeeded, etc. What are some other questions you would ask them during this process? And what are some words of advice you may have going forward? Good question.
I would start with the business questions. And I think that's most people,
Like
I don't know if you've ever
corporation,
read,
like accounting, like stuff or what?
Accounting as part of it, but just
Okay.
business in general. Maybe the accounting side of balance sheets and how those work, how they bill, what works, what doesn't, marketing, those sorts of things. I think that's overlooked. Most people are looking for, how do you train? What do you teach? What do you there's a couple books that come to mind. I always go to books because it's where I learn most of my stuff in business. I don't know if you're familiar, you're probably familiar with Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. But his cash flow quadrant, the second book, the follow-up book to that, is fantastic for understanding what quadrant you're in. Most people that do what he's doing are going from the employee quadrant to self-employed, and they're not running, they're working. And then another book that comes to mind is The E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
I was going to suggest that one.
Yeah. And too many people work in their business, not on their business. And so my advice would be to try and work on the front end more on your business and understanding the business aspect, your systems that you have in place for your teaching, your billing, your accounting, all of that stuff. Work on the systems first, and then, work on the training aspect, the personality side, and I think most people start with their personality, the training, just trying to get more people in there, the quote unquote success of growth in that way and they overlook the business side, and that's what buries most of them.
Yeah, totally agree. The only thing I'd add is, I had a buddy of mine that wanted to open a martial arts gym for a long time. And Carrick, I don't know if you're thinking the same thing, but I think you can use this analogy multiple ways. But he was so set on, I need a brick and mortar gym and I need this business plan. I need this big loan. And I have to have like this whole thing done first and then have students. And it goes back to minimal viable product. If you want to test a market, as an example, maybe, let's say you're thinking about opening a gym in a particular regional area, go to the rec center and sign up to teach classes at the rec center around fitness first. Validate that you have a client base in that area. Get 5 clients first, right? If you're open a martial arts gym, I've seen gym owners originally like rent gym space in an actual gym, lay down their mats before class and have a class and confirm that you even have a client base in that region or in that location, that there's even a need first. So try not to get wrapped up in this whole, like, I have to have this brick and mortar school. I have to have all these things in place and get major debt to be able to like, then have a gym. There's strategies and ways that you can pull it off, right? And it's everything from you subleasing an area and teaching privates to you working at another gym first as a trainer so you can, learn the ropes and see what works. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can have that minimal viable product. So I would investigate that and make sure that you're not wrapped up in this idea that you have to have this picture perfect scenario before you can actually start business. And I would argue that do it now. Like I know you're in law enforcement, but start now. Like start figuring that out now, not studying and coming up with paper, like actually get in the market and actually start working at a gym or start doing privates or whatever you need to do to start working now. Anything else you'd add, Sean?
No.
That's right. Cause that was some good knowledge. Joking.
Real good.
Yeah. All right. Scott, Luchin Bill, a component of protecting your family is the ability to take care of them medically in an emergency. Aside from standard CPR training, what other emergency medical training would you recommend one should know? Are there any courses or programs you would suggest?
Oh,
Anything?
I think everybody should know basic CPR, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a major one. And tourniquet application and have them access to one. I think those are the majors personally. Yeah. CPR, how to keep someone's heart going.
Stop bleeding.
Stop bleeding on the major end of things. And maybe into splinting, but that's, I think, secondary still. I think it's easy to rabbit hole this one and get overcomplicated and too in depth. Personally, I think if you're proficient in CPR and tourniquets, I think that's a great base and you could feel confident in that.
Yeah. And Scott, if you're looking to take this step further, dude, there's tons of options, right? Asia, my wife and I, we felt like we lacked in this area. So we took, oh my goodness, what's the freaking term? EMT training, 6 months. We had classes, 2-hour classes a week for 6 months. And I mean, the amount of data you learn
that's going deep. Yeah.
Trying to become an EMT is actually like crazy. It was actually really fun. It was funny to be in the class, right? Because they're like, the teacher had everyone introduce themselves. Like, why are they here? Oh, I'm becoming a firefighter, or I want to become a paramedic. And we're like, we're just here to learn. Like, but it was super cool. And so, I mean, Scott, if you want, sign up for EMT training. Or the other thing that you might want to consider is emergency first responder training. A lot of junior colleges and cities actually offer like first responder training. It's not as in depth as EMT, but it's like, emergency response, like in the moment, and there's even wilderness versions of those, which are super cool. So I would hop on and dive into those. So, but I agree, like from a first glance perspective, right? It's about oxygen flow, right, to the brain, which is really through the heart, right? Airway and stop bleeding, right? Those are all, kind of the three things that are constantly the focal point. So.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. How many scenarios did they talk about that you'd never thought of before?
Oh my gosh.
Through that course.
Crazy. Yeah. Crazy.
Like things you didn't even know could happen to people. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was kind of funny though. Like I really do feel, Sean, that, they give you a lot of information, right? But the treatment for everything is kind of like the same process, right? Like
the same base. Yeah.
The
same assessment process, right?
Yeah. Like the assessment process is almost exactly the same. And you dive into a lot of even what certain drugs use for what or whatever, but most of the assessment process is kind of the same, right? And you're checking the same things every single time.
Check for breath, check for pulse.
Yep. Exactly. So, but it was, in fact, I've even thought about going through again, just as a precursor. And in fact, we even thought about volunteering in like a small town or something. So we can do ride-alongs and just kind of get more experience as part of the process. So there's lots of options.
Yeah,
So
you can
look
take,
into those
I
things.
did a course with some Navy SEALs. There's like, they have these tactical courses you can take, and they're kind of like you said, maybe wilderness driven, whatever, emergency type things where you'll learn different things, how to shoot, how to, take care of wound care assessment, in bad situations. And those courses are out there. I mean, typically,
Yeah.
but obviously you got to have the money and the time to go do them, but you could go to like a 3 or 4 day course like that. And the base you'll build in those 3 or 4 days is substantial.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right, Jared Lawrence, how do you find the difference between contentment and complacency? My employer wants to promote me, and I'm hesitant because I really enjoy my current position. I feel like I would excel at the higher position and would make a lot more, but it's a lot more responsibility. Could potentially take time away from family, church, hobbies that I enjoy, etc. Trying to decide if I'm reluctant just because I am comfortable.
This I actually saw this question, and then somebody
Like,
answered
don't read
that
question.
Yeah. Well, no, it wasn't that. What actually stood out to me is somebody answered it in there, and they said, "Oh no, it's not that. It's neither one. It's just, maybe your priorities, or
Yeah.
or
Like,
what
what's
you're
more
looking at."
important?
And
Yeah.
so, like, my answer would be, it depends on what you want,
Yeah.
And for some people, they just want that 9 to 5. They want to have their time. They want to watch their football. They want to have like that quote unquote balance, and they feel good about that. And I'm not saying it's good or bad or wrong or anything else. But for me personally, I look at contentment and complacency as the same thing, because I'm every day looking at what more can I do to achieve my purpose. And for
Yeah.
me, my purpose has been to serve people, to make a positive impact in people's lives. And we were doing a family night last night, and we were going through in our church there's something called the family, the proclamation of the world, and we were going through that, and we were looking at it, and at the end it says, I have it right here actually. It says, we call upon responsible citizens and officers of government everywhere to promote these measures designed to maintain and strengthen the family as the fundamental unit of society. And so we had this conversation with our kids that every business we have is a means to that end. So everything we do, like I have a financial services businesses, it's our goal for that is to help and serve families, right? We have this motto we call no family left behind. For that, we have another company called Happy and Strong, where it's coaching for couples to help them find this balance that we're talking about, right? And how to manage it. We have, my wife just wrote a book, with that end in mind. And all of these things are, now we don't have to do any of it. And, as I say this stuff, and I'm not saying this to brag or anything, I don't want people to take this wrong way, but like I've been in a position where, we make 7 figures and have been making 7 figures since I was like 30 years old. Right. I'm 44 now. And so we've been financially independent for a long time. But that's not for me enough, because it's not a money thing. It's not. And we have these other businesses. Are they going to make us a lot of money? Do they make us money? Yeah. In most people's opinions, they make us a massive amount of money, but we didn't start them. We don't do them to make the money. It's to serve people and to help them.
Yeah.
And all it did was create extra work for me. And I found myself in a plateau a few years ago. That's how I actually came across the IC and Order a Man, and ended up meeting Ryan and talking to him as I got involved in the IC, and it landed me here for the intention of wanting to serve the mission of reclaiming and restoring masculinity, because I feel strongly enough about the importance of that in our homes and in our communities to be involved. And somehow it landed me here, right? But it's those intentions. If I had just stayed, a couple of years ago on that plateau, would I be fine? Would I be happy? Yes. But in the back of my mind, there'd be this inkling of, I know I can do more. And the way I figured that out for myself is I felt like I was just going through the motions. That makes sense. And so anytime I find myself just going through the motions, showing up, waking up and being like, okay, today feels like yesterday? Personally, I've made myself feel like I'm doing something wrong. Right. And I have this motto I've I've built into myself through affirmations that I do hard things first, and I'm the first to do hard things. It's one of the things that I tell myself every day. And so if I don't find myself doing hard things, getting out of my comfort zone, not being complacent, not, any of those things, then personally, I feel like I'm doing it wrong. Okay. Now, do I feel stretched where it's unmanageable? No, because I have systems in place to help me manage it. Right. And then I can catch myself and reel myself in and whatever else, take breaks when I need them. But that's been the last 20 years of working on that. And so everybody's different, where that's my pursuit, but someone could be listening to this like, holy crap, that guy's crazy. Right. And they could just be like, I just want a 9 to 5. I want someone to tell me what to do all day long, go get that job done. And then when I'm home, I want to go be my family guy, the guy in my church. I want to serve my community, whatever it is. And not to say you can't do those things both ways. Yeah. Right? But it comes down to what's important to you, right? At the end of your life. And let me end with this. At the end of my life, I've also had my affirmations. I will not get to the end of my life and say, I wish I would have ... And every day I remind myself of that. And so if there's anything through the day where I feel like I'm not achieving that end or on the path to achieving that end, then I get to work. I get uncomfortable. I push myself to do more. And so, if you need to gauge it on that, if you can get to the end of your life and be perfectly happy with, I had this job, I stayed at this company for 40 years. I was a good father. I was a good husband. I helped in my community and my church. I watched a lot of football. I did, and I felt good about it. You win.
Awesome.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think in summary, what I'm hearing you say, Sean, is really the answer is self-assess. Right? Why aren't you wanting to take on the new position? Is it because of a priority? Is it because you are thinking, like, no one knows this but you, right? On whether you're just doing it to be comfortable. And for most people, I think the one thing I'd add to what you're saying, Sean, is determine the priority and then determine the cost you're willing to pay.
Yes.
No one ever does that, and it drives me mad, right? And the easiest example is, next time you're in a conference meeting, pause the meeting and go, okay, who all wants to become a millionaire? And everyone will raise their hand.
Yeah.
And the answer, and that's bullshit. No, not everyone wants to be one. Why? Because they haven't paused and said, oh, what's the cost, or what do I have to do to go there? And I actually think that most people would then go, oh, you know what? No, Sean, I don't want to, right? I don't want to pay the price. I don't want to work that hard. I don't want to do these things. But ironically, look at the mindset of that. Look at what that does psychologically for people when they go, oh, I want, in this example, I want to become a millionaire. And their whole life is, I want, but yet they're never willing to do the work. It's so much more powerful to actually sit down and go, oh, what's the price to make millions? And go, oh, you know what? No, I'm not willing to pay that price. How refreshing that is. Now you're not going after something that you don't want to go after. So I think the clarity of what you want, the priority, and the price that you're willing to pay to get there is the complete thought. And then decide, and some of us are, I know I have people in my life that I love dearly, that family is so important. They're not willing to pay a price to work even a 9 to 5. And that's awesome. Right. Yeah. And they feel fulfilled about it. Right. And so just get clear, right, why you're doing certain things and what the associated price is.
And with that, it's write down the price of both, right? The price if I do and it, the price and of then not the price if I don't, right? And what that's going to feel like, and
I like it.
How you want to feel, right? Kind of look 10 years, 20 years out, where that might place you. And whatever you think is going to put you in a position where you're going to feel best about that, that's where you go.
Yeah, I like that. All right, rapid fire on this one, because I think we could probably rat hole on this one a little too long. So Andrew Barry, what do you think the world will be like in 40 years?
Oh, geez. Who knows, right? I mean, it's whatever you thought it was going to be like 20 years ago, it's probably totally different now. I mean, think 40 years back and the world's dramatically changed. I was on a call with a group of men, there's probably like 60 of us on the call. And I asked the question on the call, if the men on that call thought that racism was worse today than it was, 40, 50 years ago. And it was interesting because on that call, there's probably, I'd say 40%, 30 to 40% of the guys on the call were Black. We had a lot of Latinos, some white guys. So like white guys weren't the majority, but majority of people thought it was better. There was a couple that thought it was worse. Yeah. And all I thought was that just depends on what they're paying attention to, right? Yeah. What they're watching most of the time, but most thought it was better. So I think from that standpoint, like I personally think it's going to continue to get better. I look at my kids, they don't have, like my sons, their friends are, in our neighborhood, they're Asian, they're Indian, they're Black, they're Hispanic, they're white. Like their friends are such a good mix, where we live anyways. And they don't talk about their friends like, oh, this is my Black friend, this is my Asian friend, this is my, they're just their friends, right? And I grew up that way too, where I lived. I was a minority in the neighborhood I grew up, or the neighborhoods that I grew up in. And so it's like I'm not racist in any way because I didn't grow up with it. Did I have people in my family that were? Yeah. Right. And it's that older generation. I think we're losing that. Right. And so I think that's going to continue to get better. The more and more, especially in the US, that we become mixed. Right. Like everyone looks at me and assumes I'm just white. Right. But I'm actually Mexican. My last name is Villalobos. So but I'm not like, if you want to say I'm like a quote unquote real Mexican, right? Like, which is how funny we put those labels on it. Yeah. But if I look at my heritage.
Yeah. Or what heritage you decide to latch onto. I always find that's funny too. It's like, oh, like, and it's not negative, but my wife will say she's Hawaiian. Well, why don't you say you're Norwegian? Because you're probably more Norwegian than Hawaiian. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's funny.
That's my dad. My dad's very Mexican, very Mexican looking, and he hasn't latched on to like being Mexican because of his the way he grew up with more racism and that kind of stuff too. Yeah. And so I think that part will be better. I think there's some things like you mentioned, the metaverse, and like that's something we can't even fathom, I think, at this point. And I'll kind of leave it with this because, like you said, the rabbit hole. I think of when I got my first iPhone. My sister was graduating Coast Guard basic. We flew out to Maine, and I had my first iPhone. We actually flew into, I forget what it was, like I think it was New Jersey or something like that. No, not New Jersey, Atlantic City. Okay, so we fly into Atlantic City, and we're we didn't book a hotel. My mom loves doing this, like she loved doing this. Yeah. Where she just like, let's go on an adventure. Let's go. Let's not plan it. Let's just go. Right. And so we land and I had my first iPhone. I'm like, well, let's see what this thing can do. And we're driving. First, I put in the driving directions to the city. On the way, we book a hotel, which I'd never done before. Right. And I'm flipping out. I'm like a little kid, like, oh, I felt like James Bond. I literally kept saying, this is like James Bond stuff. Right. Like I booked a hotel. We booked a meal at Morton Steakhouse for that night. And all of these things that like literally a month earlier, I couldn't even fathom. Right. And now I have this thing in the palm of my hand that makes me feel like I'm James Bond. It's like stuff you used to watch in the movies. And so like I mentioned, Ready Player One, 40 years from now, that could be what it's like. I don't know. Right. It's like all this stuff they said would happen has, and then some, except for the flying cars. The only thing we don't have right now are the flying cars. Like if you look at the things they used to print when we were kids, but I think socially, I don't know. I think the polarization that we have right now will figure itself out over the next 40 years. Hopefully that's kind of the optimism in me. I think, the racism stuff, all of these things that are polarizing and starting to pull us apart. I think we're going to figure out at some point, actually it is better. We've been fooling ourselves. Let's focus on that. Right. And move forward with it. And then socially, I don't know if we'll become more polarized, or not, but again, I'm hoping it works itself out. Maybe it gets bad for a little while, and then 40 years from now, we're going to pull ourselves back in where it's better than it was. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, we could go a lot of different directions with it. But when I think 40 years out, I'm just thinking like at the base, the core of what we're teaching. And that's why I think this movement's so important. Right. Because if we can restore masculinity,
what we're teaching our kids,
we can strengthen our homes in these things and teach correct principles. I think the rest will figure itself out, and how we navigate and communicate it.
Yeah, I like it. All right, last question, as I have a 10:30, I'm sure you might as well. So Corey Brumwell, what about the LDS religion keeps you involved? Do you want me to go first, or either way? Go ahead.
I can go first. I am a convert to the church. And so my wife and I got baptized in 2002 together, which I didn't know was a not normal thing back then. And now is,
Hold on. So she's a convert as well.
She's a convert as well. We both investigated the church together.
And then got baptized together.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
And we investigated a lot of different churches. And so what made me want to be a part of the church, number one, I grew up in a household that was non-religious. If you ask my mom, even to the day she died, she said she was Catholic, and I don't know.
Yeah.
She probably doesn't remember the last time she went to a mass, right?
Yeah. My mom was Catholic as well.
Yeah. And so I grew up that way. My dad was anti-organized religion. He says he believes in God, but he doesn't like organized religion because he had a bad experience with the Catholic Church when I was a kid, trying to get me baptized as a kid. And so I didn't grow up in a religious family and then had a dad who was like, oh, you don't need church. And so I eventually started to feel like I needed that part in my life, especially learning success principles. Everybody talks about strengthening your faith and your family, and those things. And so I didn't have that part and wanted it. So
Sean, let me interrupt you really quick, because it's funny. We don't talk about religion too often on the podcast. I mean, we kind of do. Yeah. And for you guys that think that we never do, you're just blinded by the idea that principles transcend religions and truth is truth. Right. So, but I would, as I give this back over to you, Sean, I would challenge anybody that's might be checked out a little bit, like, oh, well, I'm not LDS, so why do I care? Because there's truth in this question, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Baptist, whether you're Hindu, whether you're Muslim, it doesn't matter, right? So find truth in what Sean's saying. Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
No, and that's perfect segue to what I was just about to say. It's everything I learned. I didn't learn from the Bible, that wanting to have that part of my life filled. It actually came from the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And so here's a book that's trying to make you wealthy, quote unquote, right? And the main principle it's saying in there is that you need to be led by a higher power. You need to have that part of your life there to really do something significant and meaningful in your life. And so I was searching for that, didn't know what it was. And going to different churches, nothing felt right. And when the first time we went to a church meeting was something they call a state conference, which is basically like 6 or 7 congregations coming together in an area. And they had these different speakers, literally like a guy they call an area authority come in, which is like this great speaker everyone's excited to hear. And what got me was a 16-year-old kid that got up there, and all he did was give a talk for like 5 minutes. And all I could think about was who and how I was at 16 years old compared to this kid. And here I am in a new marriage. I got married earlier that year to my wife. We're looking to fill this part of our life, obviously thinking about our future and children and those things. And both of our upbringings were awful from a standpoint of the environment we were in, what we saw, it was awful. And I thought, holy smokes, this kid at 16 is a better man than I am now, is honestly the thought that I had. And I'm like, I want to raise kids in this environment. And it's the first time I'd seen that in any church and environment. And so I wasn't being taught by like some pastor that had gone to school to learn how to get you to believe this stuff. Right. Yeah. And so from there, went in, started learning more, and honestly tried to poke holes in it, tried to find things that didn't make sense. Couldn't. Everything led to my life being better, me being happier, us growing a family healthier in that environment. And I didn't have like a pure testimony, and so as back to the question, what keeps you involved? It was everything made sense. That if I applied these principles, they were going to improve my life and the lives of the people around me. and I mentioned that means to the end and serving people and, and making their lives better. So I saw that happening through those principles. And then I didn't realize how deep I was in till I gained that testimony where I knew it was true, was probably about 5 to 6 years in.
Yeah.
And it was through doing the work, being in the church, having a calling. I was actually, helping the missionaries at the time. And I got this affirmation without a doubt that I knew it was true, the Spirit telling me it was. And from that point forward, then the stuff that was making my life better, then I couldn't deny it, and so any doubts sent me back to that. And I'll leave with this last thought. I heard Joe Rogan on a podcast talking about, he thought of a friend. He had a dream about a friend and that he hadn't seen in a long time. And he called him. And then when he called him, the guy, mentioned how he needed that call, and how he was in a bad spot in his life. And it really made a difference in his life. And Joe was talking about, like, we have this connection and I can't explain it, but I knew I just had to I had to make that connection. I just knew it without any other way to explain. Like I'm universally tied to that guy somehow. And, that's what that prompting by the Spirit was for me. Like if somebody asked me, why do you go? What about this? What about this? They believe this, and whatever else, it is always from this point forward going to go back to that undeniable truth that's been whispered to me, that I felt more than I heard. Right. And then if I want to think of it from like a tangible standpoint, look at the fruits, right? Are the fruits good? Are the principles being taught?
Are you a better man? Yeah.
Am I going to be a better man, better husband?
Better
Am I
family?
going to make a deeper and more meaningful impact in my community? And I can check yes to all of those. Then I'm going to keep going.
Yeah. Copy. Well, and for you guys, I actually didn't know Sean was LDS until actually this call. So, which is quite funny, actually. Yeah. Well, I get the same thing actually. Like when people are like, "You're Mormon? What? You're not a normal one." You know what I mean? I'm like,
No,
what's a normal one? I don't even understand. Just a thought that come to mind, and maybe we wrap up the question this way. So, in the Iron Council, which is our exclusive brotherhood, this month we're covering Man's Search for Meaning from Viktor Frankl. And this quote such a great book, a great book. And this quote showed up in my feed just the other day, and I wanted to pull it up and share it because I think it talks about the value of, in this context, the value of religion. Now, if you're a non-religious person, fair, read this or listen to this quote and then ask yourself, what are you doing? And the quote reads, when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. And really think about what's the ultimate deep sense of meaning. This past week, I was in Cancun with Ryan, and Mansfield was down there with us in Cancun. One of his books, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, I'm going to slaughter the title, something like that. He talks about, in one of his chapters, about men getting present with their divine nature. And my translation or my interpretation of that is something greater than yourself, that you have a higher purpose, right? And for those that believe in religion and you actually believe that you're maybe a son or a daughter of God, and that's your divine nature, holy crap, that gives you meaning.
Yeah.
Right. And Sean, what I heard from you today, it's like, hey, you've even created meaning, right? You've consciously said, hey, you know what? We're going to start these businesses. And the focal point of these businesses is to keep the family unit up front, to have families succeed, right? To help marriages succeed. That is a greater meaning. And that's one of the aspects, and generally speaking, not that it's requirement, but that's one of the benefits of religion, is a greater purpose and meaning. And how, and I can't help but look at my own children and think, how much better are they in a position to live this life when this life is not about pleasure, and not just about excitement, but it's about something greater than themselves, that there's a higher purpose to life. What an amazing way to live life. And so if it's not religion for you, then figure out that greater meaning, whatever that is. Now, don't get me wrong. I think life is meant to be enjoyable too, right? We're supposed to enjoy the process. And we kind of talked about this earlier about like, hey, some of the toughest times in life were the most enjoyable and rewarding, right? Fulfillment is a common term that we use on the podcast, right? Is excitement and happiness versus fulfillment. And I would argue that meaning in life and feeling like living a life of no regret is a life of fulfillment, not necessarily excitement. And having a deeper meaning to why we are here, or creating a deeper meaning to why we are alive is ultimately where we find fulfillment, joy, peace, and happiness. And ultimately we'll end up on our deathbeds, I think, looking back and not regretting our time that we had. I don't know.
And it has to feel right for you. And I think that's the thing. Like I tell people all the time, they're like, well, what church do I go to? And I mean, on a weekly basis, I get asked that. And I said, you know what? You need to go to some and figure it out and find out what makes the most sense for you. You could come to ours, great, come with us. But then, simultaneously, don't just do that. In my opinion, I think you need to investigate, right?
Totally. And it comes back to commitment level, not to go on a huge segue, but nothing ever got accomplished really well when you did it because Sean told you to, versus your own desire and commitment to actually doing something. Right. I mean, that's ultimately everything that we do. We should be bought into whatever it is. Or if not, question and go, why am I doing this? Right. And make sure
also don't kind of what we've been talking about this the whole time. Too many people are looking for it to be easy. Right. And that's the thing. If you want to be a part of a church or a religion or whatever it is, there's some commitments you're going to make. Totally. And that's important for all of us to be able to commit and then follow through on those things. And so if you're going about it, trying to find what's going to be the easiest for you, I think that's the wrong way to go about it as well.
Agreed. Totally agree, man. All right, man. I gotta run. I got sales meetings and all kinds of work to do.
Well, I can expect we're going to see a spike like last time we were together.
For sure. And just to offend all those that would be easily offended, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
And hope you guys have a great week. We talked about a few things. Iron Council. So to learn more about the Iron Council, go to orderofman.com/Iron Council. Get your swag like Mr. Sean's hat at store.orderofman.com. And as always, make sure to follow Ryan if you're not on Insta as well as Twitter at Ryan Mickler. Sean, what's your handle? And then we'll wrap up.
Sean V MD SHAWN VMD. So
copy. And then you can connect with me at Kip Sorensen. That's EN, Danish, none of the Swedish stuff. So Danish EN on the Sorensen. So until Friday, field notes this coming Friday, take action and become the men you were meant to be.